The stories. Ranger Station Ledger flagged a missing permit at dawn. At first light, the Ranger Station Ledger spat out an alert that one backcountry permit number did not reconcile with issued copies. The overnight dispatcher circled the entry in red marker and wrote missing, which was the only word nobody wanted to see. Latham Reyes was 39 and worked as a field ranger who managed trailheads, radios, and the old metal key cabinet. He clocked in early, poured coffee into a chipped mug, then read the ledger twice and felt the room shrink. The permit number matched a reservation tied to a solo hiker who had not checked out by yesterday's sunset. The name read Tomas Halper, age 37, and the emergency contact line ended with no answer recorded. The station had a routine for this exact situation, which looked simple on paper and complicated in real life. He pulled the overnight radio log and the reservation printouts, then called the county dispatch desk for archived calls. The dispatcher on duty answered with a clipped voice and confirmed one brief call near dusk from a nearby pullout. The call dropped before the location pinged twice, so they logged it as incomplete. The park sat in a mountain chain that people photographed from a highway turnout that smelled like hot brakes in summer. Locals said the place had thin borders where trails overlapped with old timber tracks and forgotten mining access roads. Latham set a simple goal for the day, which was to verify whether Tomas walked out early and skipped the desk. Some hikers did that, and he hated how often it fooled staff into sounding alarms. He decided to check cameras at the east exit and the service road past the old quarry first. He taped the ledger alert to his clipboard, added radio times from the night log, then headed for the truck with a paper map. A gray Subaru with mud caked behind the plates sat in the day lot under a fading trailhead sign. The plate number matched the permit file, so the vehicle check became the trigger that changed the plan entirely. His voice on the radio stayed steady, but he felt that familiar pressure behind the eyes that always came with missing cars. The last ranger who ignored a parked car overnight still had nightmares about the aftermath that followed. Latham walked a slow circle around the Subaru and took photos of the interior through the windows. He counted a blue windbreaker, a gas station coffee cup, a folded receipt, and an orange wrapper with the corner torn off. He logged the items in his notes and called the plate to the county line to confirm registration. The response came back clean, with a mailing address to a city 2 hours away and no active warrants. Two backpackers in their late 20s shuffled by and looked at the Subaru like it might answer a question. The woman spoke first and said they passed a guy at the junction near the ridge after a late climb. She described a man with a close beard, a faded cap, and a limp that looked like a boot rubbing wrong. She added that he asked about the shortcut to the lake, which did not exist, then waved and kept moving. The guy with her nodded, then said the man had a new pack that made his shoulders ride up like he was not used to it. Witness statements always came salted with memory gaps, yet both details felt real in a way that mattered. Latham thanked them, wrote their names and numbers, then reminded them to check out at the station before they left town. He pulled the dash cam card from the station truck used on the evening loop and plugged it into the office laptop. The last loop showed nothing on the service road, then a fragment of taillights near the quarry gate at gray dusk. The timestamp matched the brief call window from dispatch, which made his coffee taste like metal. He froze the frame where the taillights blinked and magnified the shot until the pixels bled and swam. The shape of the car looked like a small pickup with a roof rack, which did not match the Subaru in the lot. He saved the frame, printed it, and stapled it to the ledger alert for a later look. He called the quarry foreman on the number posted by the locked gate, then asked whether any crews ran equipment after hours. The foreman swore nothing moved, then said the gate lock had a stiff shackle that hated winter, which did not help much. A call came in from the store in the valley, where hikers bought dehydrated chili and overpriced fuel canisters in bright colors. The clerk said she recognized the name from the morning before and remembered that he used a prepaid card with a scratched strip. She mentioned he bought a paper map and a plastic whistle, then asked if everything was all right, which Latham did not answer directly. He requested the receipt copy and any camera footage that covered the register and door. The clerk said the owner saved footage for 2 weeks as a shoplifting deterrent, so she would print stills from around 9:15. The mention of a prepaid card added a wrinkle that he did not like, because it cut down searchable paper trails by a lot. He wrote it down anyway, then underlined it twice and moved on. He drove to the ridge trailhead and checked the kiosk log where people still wrote their plans with dull pencils. The entry for Tomas said out on Saturday, back by Sunday, route Circle Lake counterclockwise, camp night 1 near inlet. The loop around the lake had 4 clear stream crossings and 2 spots where cairns tempted new hikers into old fire scars. He looked for additional notes and found a faint scrawl that read, "Saw tent near logjam after dark," which lacked a dateline. He took a photo, then turned to the ridge where the wind pushed low clouds across a face that liked to break ankles. He walked the first mile with his radio on scan and found fresh boot prints that veered onto the quarry track despite a closed sign. The prints were deep on the outer heel, which matched the reported limp, and the spacing suggested someone who favored the right leg. The quarry track dropped behind fir trees and came out near a rusted gate with a battered lock that still hung closed. A torn strip of fabric in a dull blue shade clung to a stump where a person might squeeze past the hinge. He bagged the strip, wrote the time, then looked up to see crows cross low and fast like bad messengers. He followed the track to a flat where water pooled in old ruts and reflected a sky that never looked friendly in March. A mound of gravel showed fresh tire marks with an odd zigzag that looked like someone learning a clutch by feel. He crouched and ran a finger along the rut wall and felt dust that had not settled into crust, which put the timing close. The quarry foreman had denied any late activity, so the marks likely tied to whoever drove near the gate at dusk. He shot photos, measured the width with a broken stick and a tape, then plotted the line on his map. Back at the station, he spread the notes, photos, and the printed taillights frame across a desk that had a gouge shaped like Idaho. He listened to the archive dispatch call again, which captured a short, breathy voice, saying quick words that fractured with static. The caller had said something that sounded like lost permit or lost person, then a muffled clack, and the line fell quiet. He played the clip 5 times and wrote down 2 interpretations with a question mark, which was the style the supervisor liked. The radio log from hikers listed a second-hand report from a fisherman who heard a whistle near the inlet after dusk. The fisherman had used a cheap handheld radio with a weak battery, so the recording lived as a line of text and not a voice. That was fine, because the whistle purchase from the Valley store had already planted itself in his mind as a breadcrumb. Late morning brought a small-town police officer named Mara Key, who handled the highway stretch that touched the park border. She was 33 and worked patrol shifts that crossed into everything that did not fit elsewhere. She parked by the Subaru and walked up with a notepad and a friendly face that could turn sharp in a second. They stood by the hood and traded notes that barely needed full sentences after years of joint calls. She said the highway turnout camera caught a gray pickup with a roof rack at 1842, heading toward the quarry. She added that a volunteer firefighter reported an unusual truck bed loaded with tarps after 9 near the county line. Latham held up the taillight's print and said the shape tracked with what she had. She nodded, then asked whether the missing permit might actually be a duplicate number from a previous season. He blinked once, then went very quiet because that question hit a different nerve. Permit numbers rolled over every winter long before the system went digital, and some older blocks had gaps and repeats. The ledger printed the flag because the manual book showed the number as issued to a different name in late fall. He dug into the archive cabinet that breathed dust and pine and pulled the worn book from the shelf, marked 98. The ink on the page showed the same number assigned to a group from a climbing club from a city 3 hours west. The lead name read Rayan Cade, age 32, and a phone number that matched a defunct area code now recycled. He compared the handwriting from both permit slips and saw the same loop on the number 4 in the dateline. That did not make sense until he looked at the clerk's signature, which matched a retired staffer who kept garage sales every summer. He wrote down the name and the year in words so the report would not kick back for formatting later. He stepped outside and called the retired clerk on a personal number found in an old staff tree near the copier. The woman sounded bright and happy to hear a ranger voice, then quieted when he explained the duplicate number issue. She said she used to pre-write permits during busy seasons to speed lines, then fill names in with a light touch. She added that some pads got stored in a desk drawer after winter changeover and might have ended up in the surplus box. That surplus box sometimes went to the annual trailer sale with old radios and busted snowshoes for pocket change. He felt his throat go dry and asked whether any blank slips could be floating in the world with the seal already stamped. She said it was possible, then apologized and said nobody had asked about that practice since 1998 ended. He thanked her gently and wrote a note for the supervisor that would not make anyone cheerful. The store clerk sent stills that showed Tomas at the counter holding a paper map in a stiff hand with a white bandage. The timestamp read 9:12, which lined up with when the trailhead sign-in sheet filled up. A second still showed a man behind him wearing a quarry company cap who bought batteries and jerky. That detail landed like a small stone in a bigger pond because of the quarry track prints and the taillights frame. Latham called the quarry foreman again and asked to see the shift roster for the past 2 days. The foreman sighed and said he would email a screenshot since office rules required written requests for full copies. The screenshot arrived with smudged names and a note about 2 contractors hired short-term for cleanup after heavy rain. One contractor matched the cap logo from the still, which felt like a door creaking open after a stubborn winter. Latham and Officer Key drove to the quarry safety office, which smelled like coffee and oil and a fight nobody wanted. The foreman met them with a clipboard and a face that said he hated unexpected questions on a weekday. Key kept her voice friendly and asked to speak with the contractor who wore the cap with the same faded stitch. The foreman said the man was named Vicente Rowe, age 36, who lived in a rented room above the tire shop. He added that Rowe had left early the previous night because a radiator hose blew near the county line. Key asked to see the truck, and the foreman pointed to a gray pickup with a rack and tarps bunched in back. The bed still held a coil of new rope, a rusted shovel, and a muddy cooler that smelled like lake water and gasoline. Latham felt that metallic taste again, which was never a sign of a good afternoon ahead. Rowe arrived from the far lot with hands raised and a look that said he already knew why they were here. He said he had filed a work order for the hose, which they confirmed with a carbon sheet and a phone photo. Key asked whether he had been near the lake after dark, and he said he left the quarry road to test the hose under load. He added that he pulled aside at the turnout near the inlet and heard a whistle that made him wonder about a prank. He did not call anyone because his phone was dead after streaming music during cleanup, which landed badly but not impossibly. He said he saw a small tent by the logjam and a lantern glow. Then a figure waved and yelled something about a permit. Key wrote it down and asked for permission to look inside the cooler, which Rowe granted with a shrug and a steady jaw. Inside lay 2 empty water jugs, a crumpled fuel canister sleeve, and a plastic whistle in an unopened bag from the Valley store. Back at the station, Latham laid the whistle sleeve next to the store receipt copy and saw a mismatch in barcode digits. The sleeve in the cooler matched an older shipment code that the store had sold out months ago during a discount run. That meant the whistle in the cooler likely came from a different source than the one Tomas bought at 9:12. He looked again at the still where Tomas held the map with the bandaged hand and noticed a line of dried mud on the cuff. The mud looked pale and powdery, which matched the quarry fill used to stabilize the service road after storms. He wrote a timeline that pinned Tomas at the store, then likely at the quarry road, and finally near the inlet after dusk. He wrote a parallel line for Rowe that put him at the quarry, then on the same road, then near the inlet while testing a repair. The lines felt too neat until he added the duplicate permit issue that now seemed like a hinge rather than a footnote. He dug into the city address on file for Tomas and found a rental building with mailboxes that had newer locks installed last winter. The property manager answered with the cheerful speed of someone who wanted a clean day and already knew it was lost. She said a man with that name had paid cash, kept to himself, and left 2 weeks early with no forwarding note. She also said a different name had appeared on a delivery label once, which the courier mentioned when buzzing the wrong unit. The alternate name sounded familiar, and it clicked only when he reopened the 1998 ledger page. It matched the lead from the old climbing club permit, which tied the duplicate number to a person who should have aged out by now. The detail did not mean they were the same person, but it did mean someone liked to reuse names tied to old paper. Officer Key ran the alternate name through an old case index that kept records of search and rescue incidents on paper and microfilm. A report from 2 winters back described a fake distress call at the same inlet that lured volunteers into a risky night crossing. The caller used a prepaid phone and a different name, yet the voice transcription carried similar clipped phrasing and rushed breaths. The motive at the time seemed like a cruel prank, and nobody had linked it to anything tangible after the snow melted. Latham rechecked the gap between the whistle report and the dropped call and found a sliver where a person could move a short distance. He called the firefighter, who reported the unusual truck bed, and asked whether the tarps had looked wet or pulled tight. The firefighter said the tarps were tied tidy and dry, then added that the driver waved like a man who wanted to be seen. Afternoon shadows drew long, so they hiked to the inlet with a drone from the county that tracked heat signatures. The drone skimmed treetops and sent back images of the logjam, the bank, and the flat near the old survey marker. No body, no fresh campsite, just flattened grass near the logjam where a tent might have stood during a short decoy. They found 2 sets of prints, one deep on the right heel and one narrower with an even stride that cut toward the quarry track. Near the waterline, he found a paper map folded in a way he recognized from the still, which made his chest go tight. The map held a smear of pale mud and a faint X near the old prospector's trail that dead-ended at a slide. He bagged the map and stared at the X until it felt like it stared back, then marked the spot on his own copy. The slide path opened into a shallow cut with wooden forms left from a never-finished footbridge project funded in 2005. He followed the forms until he reached a square of ground tamped hard as a table near a tree with a scar. The earth felt too tidy for random hikers, and the tree scar had fresh resin that caught light in a clean yellow bead. He brushed aside pine duff and found a buried plastic box that held a stack of old permit slips with the seal already stamped. The slips matched the retired clerk's pre-written style, and several had Rancade typed in a cheap courier font. A second stack carried blank lines and a stamp pad spot like a kit for people who wanted official-looking paper for a plan. He felt a chill that did not come from wind, then called Key over and photographed the box from 3 angles. The twist revealed itself slowly, as if embarrassed to be simple after such a day of layered rumors and tire marks. Someone had staged a missing hiker using a duplicated permit number and a prepaid trail of receipts to trigger a standard response. The purpose was not to vanish, but to bait a small law enforcement swarm toward the lake while a second person moved cargo from the quarry. The zigzag tire marks in the gravel now read like a practice route for a heavy load that needed a quiet window. The fisherman's whistle and the tent glow created a cautious pause in anyone tempted to check the inlet on foot. The taillights near dusk were a partner vehicle that pulled close to the logjam, then backed out during the start of the false search. The target was not a person, but scrap copper and tools stored in a locked shed near the service road past the old quarry. They found the shed lock sliced clean with a battery saw when they returned with the foreman and a bolt cutter key. The inventory list taped inside showed spools of copper wire and fuel additives that had resale value in cash-only salvage yards. The contractor truck bed dimensions matched the load footprint on the dusty floor, and a partial shoe print matched the even stride near the inlet. The limp prints belonged to whoever wore a new boot wrong, which now felt like another layer for misdirection rather than a true injury. When confronted, Rowe did not fold, but the quiet employee who ran the tire shop room rentals gave a statement. He said Rowe met a man who matched Tomas in the parking lot and moved tarps between vehicles near sunset. He added that Rowe left after 9 with the bed loaded to the rails, which aligned with the firefighter observation with uncomfortable precision. The county prosecutor would need clean evidence, so they worked careful and slow to gather the chain. The paper box of pre-written permits became a centerpiece, since it explained how the ledger flag could be predicted in advance. The duplicate number drew attention at dawn by design, which pulled eyes away from the road where cargo rolled past a gate. The prepaid receipt at the Valley store placed a decoy at a predictable time, which witnesses could later repeat with conviction. The dropped call created a sympathetic recording in the archive that every incident review would elevate in urgency. The taillights in the dash cam and the turnout camera filled the gaps with enough glow to animate a story that felt real. None of it solved every moment, Yet together it built a scaffold sturdy enough for charges that did not fall apart. They never found a body by the inlet, which fit the theory that nobody had been in true danger that night. A week later, a different store camera captured Tomas in a neighboring county buying a tire patch kit with a clean, unbandaged hand. The clip went into the case file under reportedly cited, along with a printout of the copper sales ledger from a salvage yard off the highway. Rowe took a short plea on theft and tampering with evidence, which irritated people who liked long answers. The paperwork on the duplicate permits triggered a policy change that barred pre-writing anything since 2021 onward. The retired clerk cried in the parking lot when she learned her old shortcuts had fed a scam, then hugged Latham like a nephew. He told her people adapt to pressures they do not design, and the fix mattered more than the blame. When the Subaru finally left the lot on a tow, the trailhead looked as ordinary as a grocery aisle on a Tuesday. Officer Key stood with her hands in her jacket and watched the tow lights climb the hill toward the highway. She said the simplest cons always hide in systems that run on habit and paperwork. Then she smiled without much humor. Latham looked at the ridge where the wind never ran out, then at the ledger that still sat on the desk. He thought about the whistle and the map and the soft faith people place in official stamps and good intentions. Later, he locked the station, and the rafters creaked in the cool like an old house learning a new rule. He drove past the turnout and looked once at the lake, which held its secrets with the stubborn patience of cold water and granite. He told himself they had not solved every detail, but they had nudged the pattern toward daylight, which was enough for now. The stories. This motel room voicemail raised a separate question. On a rainy Tuesday, near the end of tourist season, a motel room voicemail carried a question that did not belong. It turned a tired end of shift into something careful and strange, and it started with a blinking red light. Dorian Pike worked nights at the Northway Motor Inn, 37, a patient manager who fixed things others ignored. The place sat off a service road past a truck stop, with a diner and a feed store as neighbors. He started that shift with a simple goal: balance the register, finish the towel count, and coax the ice machine back alive. The storm slowed arrivals, and the security monitor rolled its quiet grayscale loop of the parking lot. Housekeeping left a note about room 12, the kind of note other managers forgot to read. The bed looked unused after checkout, the television glowed at low volume, and the phone message light blinked at eye level. He carried a spare key, pushed the door open, and smelled damp carpet and motel soap. Nothing surprising. The news channel murmured through commercials, a static map of counties he could name without trying. On the nightstand sat a spiral notebook half full of block letters, a takeout cup, and a key card with the room number worn. He pressed the voicemail button with his knuckle because the button shocked him once in summer. A male voice filled the room with a flat question that stopped his hand, like a bad chord laid wrong. The voice asked, "Did you move the smoke detector again?" And then silence, followed by the system tone and cutoff. He replayed it twice, and the question felt like a pebble in a shoe, something to be dealt with. Smoke detectors did not get moved by guests without reason, and nothing about the room said routine or careless. Dorian checked the detector on the ceiling, a cheap white unit that did not match the others on the hall. The motel used one supplier for replacements, and this casing lacked their sticker and the penciled date inside. He stood on the chair, unscrewed the ring, and found fresh scuffs around the mounting plate as if removed recently. The unit felt heavier than a sensor should, and the test light never flashed, which meant battery or guts. He set it down on the table, and the vent above the television rattled just a little with the wind. He turned off the television, let the room get quiet, and heard faint tapping through the vent to the next room. The motel had a habit of telling its secrets through noise, and he had learned that language over years. He stepped into the hall and knocked on room 14, where a regular was finishing a long week of field work. Quinn Hauer was 29, a cell tower contractor with a tool bag and a precise way of speaking. Quinn opened the door and said, "Heard the tapping, thought it was heat. But it kept hitching, like somebody counting seconds." Dorian nodded, thanked him, and walked back to room 12 with the detector in his hands and a growing list. He checked the guest ledger for that room, found the name Shane Bennett written in rough ballpoint yesterday afternoon. The rate was paid in cash with a $20 deposit, and there was a note about requesting a high floor. The motel only had 2 floors, which made the request sound like reflex, not preference, and it bothered him. He logged into the creaking PBX console behind the office door, a beige box that stored more than it admitted. The system kept message times, not caller numbers, but it stored archived call counts and extension traces within limits. The voice message timestamp put the call at 4:21 this morning when he had been home asleep. The system marked it as external to the motel, but without a number, which meant blocked or masked through a service. He played the message once more through the PBX speaker, and this time he listened past the words to the air. There was a faint horn in the background, not a car, something long and low that cut through the compressor hum. The town had 2 train crossings, one near the elevator factory, the other near the river access by Mill Road. The factory horn sounded higher by habit, and the river crossing had a long, lonely tone that travelers remembered. He wrote train horn in the notebook, then dialed the non-emergency line and described a suspicious device in room 12. He kept the language careful and factual, and the dispatcher asked for his name, then said a unit would respond. Housekeeper Irina Kowalski stopped by the desk to clock out. 58. Quiet. A 10-year veteran of the place. She saw the detector on the counter and said she smelled glue when she changed linens, thought it came from that. He asked if she saw anyone in room 12 after checkout, and she said only a woman with a baseball cap. She had a service bucket and a ring of keys, and Irina thought she was with maintenance since she walked like staff. There were 2 maintenance guys by payroll. Neither wore caps, and neither worked Tuesdays after 3 in the afternoon. He wrote this down, then checked a clipboard of deliveries, and found a package signed by someone not on schedule. The box came yesterday morning for guest Bennett, signed by a scrawl that did not match any front desk initials. It contained a replacement smoke detector per the note, which made the blinking voicemail question feel heavier. Dorian carried the box to the office, found bubble wrap inside, plus a cutout where the detector had Saturday, tape residue stuck in a neat circle on the cardboard, and a tiny zip bag with nothing in it fell from a seam. He looked at the detector again under the desk lamp and noticed a slot behind the grill where no slot should be. He slid a paperclip in and clicked against something spring-loaded, which offered and then refused to move. The responding officer arrived while the storm thickened, and his boots left dark prints that dried like islands. He introduced himself as Deputy Holloway, 40, calm voice, and asked for the room key, the voicemail, and the timeline. Dorian played the message for him on the office speaker, and the train horn showed itself again under the words. Holloway wrote it down, then called in the serial from the detector, and the brand came back to a discount dropshipper. They walked to room 12 with the box, and Holloway took photos with a little camera that hated the low light. He gave Dorian latex gloves from his pocket, then pointed at the slot and said he would rather not break it. Dorian tried the paperclip again, this time with a little twist and a push, and the plate popped forward an inch. Inside sat something that was not a sensor, a puck with a lens barely visible, and a microcard at the edge. He did not pull it, he did not touch the lens, he just looked at Holloway, whose jaw tightened for 3 beats. The deputy called dispatch and asked for a detective on call, then told Dorian to step back and breathe. The motel office had a rule about honesty with guests, which worked until honesty touched evidence and risk. Dorian printed a sign for the counter that said service delay for weather, and the storm covered that small necessary lie. Holloway kept the room closed and waited for the detective, while Dorian returned to the PBX to audit messages. He printed the log for the last 2 days, circled 3 external calls to room 12, all between midnight and 5. He played the first 2 messages carefully, and they were empty hang-ups, with the same horn underneath and 1 faint laugh. He resisted all guessing and wrote horn consistent in a margin, then underlined the time of the 3rd message. He checked the security drive for the hallway, and the camera caught only the tops of heads and a bit of shoulder. At 3:12 this morning, a person in a cap walked by with a tote, turned left, and vanished from frame. Dorian paused on the frame and noted the sleeve stripes, a set of 2 pale bands near the wrist. Irina had seen a cap on the woman, and the frame showed hair tucked tight, with a loose strand at the neck. Detective Renner arrived with a kit and a steady patience, a mid-40s investigator who disliked motel carpet. She listened to the voicemail twice, glanced at the detector, and asked Dorian to walk her through intake and checkout. He explained the cash payment, the request for a high floor, and the delivery for a detector that should not change. She wrote as he talked, asked about prior incidents, and he mentioned 2 privacy complaints from summer travelers. Those complaints stopped after he replaced room units from the same run, and he had kept the receipts and dates. He pulled copies from the accordion file, and she photographed them, then asked whether any rooms shared vent passageways. He described the vent layout: straight shaft between rooms in pairs, with thin walls that carried sound farther than comfort. Renner nodded and walked to room 14, asked Quinn to step into the hall, and confirmed the tapping report. Quinn described the pace like a metronome, not random: 2 taps, then a short pause, repeated until the thunder started. Renner wrote it down, and Dorian drew the pattern in a margin, then realized something he had missed earlier today. The television in room 12 was on the news channel at low volume, which travelers often used as a decoy. Some people left it on to pretend someone was inside, which meant the room might have been staged after a quick exit. Renner opened the detector with gloves and eased the card into a tiny envelope, then sealed it with her initials. She asked Dorian about any computers to view file sizes, not contents, just metadata, and he shook his head no. She used her agency laptop to check what the card held, and the screen reflected in the blank television glass. The card contained multiple files named by date and time, a standard naming scheme, which meant scheduled recording, not motion. Renner closed the laptop without opening anything and said the specifics would wait for a warrant and a lab. She asked for the guest profile again, and he gave the same summary, plus the note about the signed delivery receipt. Dorian returned to the box and saw a faint watermark in the cardboard that read Consolidated Freight with a Town. The town sat by the river tracks where the Longhorn lived, and the company ran a warehouse near the ramp. He wrote the company down as an external lead, then called the number printed on their listing from a web search. He asked, in his perfectly polite desk voice, whether any packages left for a motel guest yesterday morning. The dispatcher said they handed one small box to a contractor with a name that matched no employee on file. It was recorded on their log with a time, and the signature block contained the same scrawl as his earlier photocopy. Renner thanked him for the call, took the information, and said she would handle any next contact with that company. She requested the spiral notebook from the room, and Dorian placed it in a bag, pages open to the block letters. The letters contained hotel names and highway exits, a list of routes that matched a traveler who did not like surprises. Some lines included cable channel numbers, others included lamplight wattages, and one included the word ceiling with a star. Dorian remembered a complaint from 2 weeks ago from a different guest about a beeping detector in room 5. He checked his maintenance log and found he replaced that unit on a Wednesday after a short argument about deposit charges. He fetched the old detector from the storage shelf, where broken things went to wait for disposal, and compared its weight. The broken one felt light as expected, and the one from room 12 felt like 2 of them taped together. He unscrewed the broken one and found no strange slot, only dust, a dead battery, and the usual brittle plastic. Renner watched from the doorway and nodded, then answered her phone, and her yes sounded like cautious confirmation. The non-emergency dispatcher had pulled 2 archived calls from the spring that sounded similar, not identical, but close. Each referenced a detector, each asked whether it had been moved, and both targeted rooms paid in cash and late. Renner asked Dorian to print any copies of photo identification kept on file, and he showed the log policy instead. The inn did not photocopy identification unless the card used for payment had a name mismatch or a mismatch with booking. He looked at the lobby camera track for the check-in, and the frame showed a jacket with sleeve stripes again. The face never lifted to the lens, and the cap brim hid most features, but the build matched the hallway pass. The storm eased into a steady pour, the kind that makes a street look polished, and the motel sign clicked. Renner gave Dorian a statement form and asked him to write what he did and why, as precisely as possible. He wrote that a voicemail raised a secret question about a smoke detector, which is not a thing guests ask. He wrote that the detector was wrong for the room, that its weight felt off, and that a slot existed. He wrote that a horn in the background suggested a location near the river tracks and that a freight watermark helped. He wrote that a woman with a cap carried a tote down the hall, and that tapping came through the vent. Renner finished securing the room and returned the hallway to regular use, with a note to keep room 12 closed. She told Dorian that similar devices had surfaced in short-term rentals nearby, and that his details tightened the pattern. She thanked Irena and Quinn for their help, then left with Holloway and the sealed card and the odd detector. Dorian stood in the quiet office and watched the parking lot glow under a light that had survived 4 storms this month. He made copies of everything for the file, then sat with the register and finished what he started hours earlier. The ice machine hummed to life with a stubborn cough, which felt like a small mercy after the nervous work. 2 days later, Renner called to say the voicemail mattered more than he realized because of the horn and the freight. The freight record placed a contractor truck at the warehouse near the river during the call window before dawn. She said the case would likely spread across jurisdictions and that his notes already sat in a shared folder. She did not share more, and he did not ask, because he understood the slow way these things must move to hold. Quinn checked out with a handshake and a tight thanks, and Irena started a new hallway routine that included ceiling checks. The motel added a policy line about devices, not because it fixed the world, but because it set a tone. On the next Tuesday, the phone light blinked again in a different room, and Dorian felt a breath catch. He pressed the button and heard a normal message from a family asking for extra towels, and he laughed because relief deserves sound. He still thought about the spiral notebook, about the starred word ceiling, and about the staged television glow. He thought about the simple question that did not belong, and how such questions sometimes open doors no one planned. Travelers came and went, the storm season thinned, and the parking lot felt like a stage that forgot its lines. Dorian kept the office tidy and the camera lenses clean, and he learned to trust the hairs rising on his arm. The stories. This highway turnout kept a missing trucker's toll receipt. The turnout sits between scrub pines and a windblown ditch, and it held a toll receipt longer than anyone realized. The receipt came from a night when a driver stopped for 6 quiet minutes, then disappeared beyond the concrete barriers. Dorian Hale worked highway maintenance for the county, age 37, and he took pride in simple, measurable things. His Thursday assignment was routine line checks, with a side errand to clear debris from an overflow grate near the eastbound turnout. The morning felt ordinary as he idled the orange pickup, sipped gas station coffee, and clipped a laminated checklist to his clipboard. He pulled on gloves, set cones, then walked the shoulder counting reflective posts, and he hummed a tune he could not place. At the turnout, he knelt by the grated culvert, where stray plastic and crushed cans made a soggy stripe against rusted mesh. A folded paper showed only a blue stripe and a timestamp smudged by rain. The paper was stiff, thin, and heat-printed, the kind used at toll plazas that still handed cash change. He eased it open with a screwdriver tip, read a plaza name he recognized, and traced a time almost exactly 2 years back. The fare matched a commercial axle count, and a faint pen mark read Brandt in shaky block letters. Dorian knew the surname because his father still kept a clipped article about a driver named Silas Brandt. The story said a veteran hauler left a warehouse near midnight, then failed to deliver a load of drywall and never returned calls. Investigators canvassed truck stops, pulled camera footage, and searched an exit ramp pond where a guardrail once stood bent. The county replaced that rail within a week, and Dorian helped pour the new anchors under a bitter early spring sky. He remembered the way troopers scanned the water with side-scan gear, and he remembered a family photo taped to a utility pole. The picture showed a smiling man with deep crow feet lines, wearing a ball cap shaped by years of Sunday. He set the receipt on the warm truck hood, and he felt a nervous pull he did not want to ignore. He radioed dispatch for a non-emergency inquiry, explained he found what looked like a toll slip, and requested guidance from the patrol office. The operator took his badge number, logged the time, and said an investigator would call once she could review the old case file. The call came after lunch from an investigator named Fenna Ortiz, who spoke carefully but asked direct questions. She confirmed the surname matched the missing driver, and she asked Dorian to secure the paper in a clean envelope. She told him to keep working as usual because she needed to check archived calls and bridge camera timestamps before driving out. He locked the receipt in a plastic map pouch, finished the grate work, then walked the turnout with a slower, sharper eye. The asphalt showed faint striations where heavy rigs often idled, and a single bolt head gleamed bright against dull gravel. A cracked mirror shard lay half buried near the weeds, reflecting a tuft of cloud that moved like something alive. He logged the shard as debris, snapped a photo with a timestamp, and saved it among his maintenance images from earlier weeks. The images, he realized, showed the same corner of concrete week after week, and the corner looked slightly cleaner today. That thought returned him to the culvert, where the receipt had been wedged behind a lip most drivers never noticed. The patrol cruiser pulled up near too, and Investigator Ortiz stepped out carrying a clipboard and a small camera. She was mid-40s, concise, and she asked for the sequence from his arrival to the moment he opened the folded paper. He described the gloves, the screwdriver tip, the awkward angle at the grate, and the exact place where the paper caught. She photographed the culvert, the hood of his truck, and his gloves, then placed the receipt in a fresh evidence sleeve. She asked whether he had heard of any scavengers or roadside sellers who might pick through turnouts in quiet hours. He shook his head and mentioned night fishermen at the quarry road and a retired lineman who walked his dog near dawn. Ortiz had already checked dispatch logs from the night Silas vanished, and those logs showed 2 calls near that turnout. One came from a motorist reporting a stalled box truck on the shoulder, which cleared itself before a trooper arrived. The second came from a bridge camera technician, noting a brief outage around 2:12, which was dismissed as routine. She asked permission to pull Dorian's maintenance photos, the ones covering every week around the 2-year mark. He agreed without hesitation and forwarded the entire folder, even the blurry shots he usually deleted at the office. Ortiz scrolled methodically, then paused on an image taken exactly 3 days after the reported outage at the bridge camera. The photo showed the same culvert, same weed line, and a crumpled label half hidden under wet pine needles. Ortiz zoomed until the pixels blurred, then noted a fragment that looked like the corner of a toll slip. She compared that week to the next, where the culvert looked cleaner, then to the next, where more wind-blown trash filled the grid again. Dorian pointed toward the bright bolt he noticed earlier, which did not appear in his older photos at all. Ortiz crouched and confirmed the bolt was new stainless, fixed through a small angle bracket that sat flush to the curb. She said the bracket was not standard for that guardrail style, and it looked like something installed to anchor a temporary brace. They walked the rail from cone to cone, and she stopped at a spot where the soil sloped into a greasy black ribbon. The smell suggested old brake dust and gear oil, and the vegetation showed a flattened path that looked more deliberate than random. She made a note to have a canine unit sweep the embankment later, and she radioed for a drone with a thermal camera. Across the turnout, a small convenience store faced the service road, and a metal bell chimed when the door opened. The clerk on duty was a woman named Karen Duplessis, age 29, who brewed coffee and stocked shelves during quiet afternoons. She said plenty of trucks idled at that turnout, but she remembered a white day cab sitting without a trailer once. Karen produced a spiral notebook where she kept odd notes to settle change disputes and lottery recollections. On a page dated 2 years back, she wrote, "Night truck, no trailer, short man, hat, hands shaking, paid in cash for cigarettes." She told them the man left a toll receipt on the counter by accident, then grabbed it quickly and stuffed it into his jacket. Ortiz photographed the notebook and asked about timing, and Karen said she wrote the note after midnight while the bell still echoed. She admitted she might be off by 20 minutes, but she remembered the man said something that felt like a warning. He said the word toll like it mattered. Then he asked if anyone was working late at the bridge control shed. The bridge control shed sat above the river, spanned 3 miles east, where cameras watched traffic and signboards scrolled travel times. Ortiz called a former technician named Orville Pacheco, age 62, who kept his own notes in a faded green ledger. He said he logged an unexpected visit that same night. When a man in a reflective vest asked for camera reset access, Orville said the visitor showed a badge sleeve without a badge, which made him cautious, and he refused to grant access. He called the after-hours line to report a vendor mismatch, and the line recorded his message with the time he spoke. The line, according to archived records, Ortiz had already pulled, captured footsteps, a door-open sound, and muffled traffic noise. They returned to the turnout while the drone lifted into a steady grid pattern, and Ortiz asked Dorian for his honest read. He believed the receipt had stayed near that lip for months, then shifted forward during a recent heavy storm last spring. The spidering of dirt on the paper edges matched the way silt moves when culverts push water hard toward daylight. The drone operator flagged a heat anomaly under the slope where the grease ribbon angled into brush and sage. A buried object held temperature longer than the surrounding dirt, and its shape suggested a long chassis with a missing rear section. Dorian stared at the screen while Ortiz arranged a small excavation crew and a wrecker with a winch and safety chains. The bucket peeled turf like old cloth, revealing crumpled metal painted white and a scraped cereal plate near a crushed step. The cab had separated from a frame that showed clean-cut ends, not torn ends, and Dorian felt his stomach tighten hard. The clean ends suggested someone removed the trailer hardware with purpose, then eased the cab down the slope intentionally. Ortiz called the medical examiner and the state commercial unit, then stepped away to speak to a number marked confidential. She returned with a firm face and told Dorian she needed one more favor while crews secured the scene. She asked him to drive to the scrapyard 2 exits west, where way logs sometimes kept more truth than anyone expected. At the yard, a supervisor named Harlan Voss, age 55, carried a tablet loaded with camera stills and cash tickets. He said people brought cut frames to his scale weekly, and he flagged one ticket dated 3 days after the reported outage. The still showed a flatbed hauling a truck frame section without a cab, strapped tight with chains and cheap ratchet binders. The driver wore a reflective vest, a hat pulled low, and gloves that looked new, and his hands seemed unsteady at the counter. Harlan remembered the hands because the driver dropped a toll receipt while counting bills, then apologized like he was late for something else. The camera caught the corner of the paper, and the blue stripe matched the one on Dorian's find. Ortiz requested the original video and the ticket, then compared plate numbers with the state registry and commercial inspections. The plate belonged to a hauler who reported his flatbed stolen for one night, then found it returned with fresh chain marks. He never filed a full report because the trailer came back clean, and he feared insurance delays could wreck his month. Piece by piece, a picture formed that did not look like a ghost or a river taking what it wanted. A driver left a warehouse near midnight, stopped at the turnout, and met someone who needed the cab but not the frame. The someone posed as a camera contractor, killed a low-priority feed, then arranged to hide a cab where eyes rarely linger long. The twist came from a small sticker inside the cab roof, which a trooper peeled away from dust with a gentle thumb. It showed a fleet service company that kept neat records, including oil changes, mileage notes, and a knack for precise dates. Their files showed work performed 2 weeks before the disappearance, and the mechanic wrote a side note about a key copy. The mechanic wrote that a third key was requested by a man who said he was the night dispatcher, and he paid in cash. The mechanic thought nothing of it until Ortiz called. Then he remembered the man never signed the usual authorization line. The shop camera showed the man wearing a vest like a contractor, and the badge sleeve again appeared strangely empty. Ortiz pulled toll plaza footage from the night in question and synchronized it with the scrapyard stills and the bridge notes. The day cab crossed the plaza as expected, and the timestamp matched the receipt tucked in the culvert lip. The truck exited near the turnout, camera glare washed the lane, then resumed with a frame that missed a single clear license view. Witness statements placed a white day cab idling without a trailer, and a clerk recorded restless hands that left a paper corner. A technician refused an access request, and a maintenance line captured footsteps and a door open sound after the call ended. A stolen flatbed left and returned in a narrow window, and a cut frame crossed a scale with a driver who spoke softly. The medical examiner recovered remains from the cab, and dental records from a previous injury matched a profile kept by his dentist. The family received a closed answer shaped like sorrow rather than speculation, because speculation had gnawed at them for years. The drywall load had been simple, the route had been familiar, and the end had hidden in a slope beside a lonely turnout. Motive came faster than Dorian guessed, and it turned on a small insurance clause that rewarded a competing carrier. The person posing as a contractor had worked for that carrier briefly, then left a digital trail of stolen dispatch templates. He understood cameras, toll patterns, and how to bend the timing of people who worked graveyard shifts with tired eyes. Ortiz did not say solved aloud in front of anyone, and she used the gentle phrasing investigators save for families who have waited. She told them the discovery was due to a maintenance worker who kept notes, who walked slowly, and who refused to shrug. She mentioned the receipt that waited in a lip everyone missed, and she promised it would be handled with care. A week later, Dorian returned to the turnout with a new grate and a broom because he wanted the place to look tended. He replaced the odd bracket with the correct plate, tightened the bright bolt, and brushed the concrete until the dust lifted. Cars hissed past, and a train horn carried from somewhere distant, and the ditchwater moved with a plain, steady sound. He thought about simple, measurable things as he loaded the cones and folded his checklist, and the tune finally came back. His father used to whistle that tune while changing oil in a gravel driveway under a high summer Sunday. He stood quietly, listened to wind in the pines, and let the ordinary noise of the road remind him why details matter. Karen's notebook went back under the counter, Orville's green ledger returned to a shelf, and the scrapyard ticket stayed scanned. The river cameras got a new maintenance sticker with a fresh signature line, and technicians added a habit of requesting 2 verifications. The county posted a small plaque at the turnout with no names, only a line about patience and careful work. When Dorian passed that spot after later storms, he slowed as a reflex, and he watched small things settle where gravity pointed. He understood that places remember without meaning to, and that a crumpled paper can hold a night in its faded stripe. He started stopping for coffee at the store more often, just to say hello and to count the steady ring of the doorbell. The road kept moving, trucks kept downshifting on the grade, and the turnout regained its ordinary shabbiness in summer heat. Dorian did not tell the whole story to anyone at the diner, and he did not dramatize what the cable hooks revealed. He kept the memory in the quiet pocket of workdays, where tools sat cleaned in their tray and notes lined up square. There was no miracle in any of it, only a patient chain of human attention passed hand to hand without ceremony. The receipt was not miraculous either, it was simply patient, wedged where water and wind forgot to sweep. A missing driver got his name back in a single sentence, and a family traded uncertainty for grief that could finally breathe. Years will pass, and that turnout will keep catching wrappers and leaves, and a worker will kneel to clear them. Someone will hum without knowing why, and maybe remember how a small slip of paper can outweigh a rumor. The place will not speak, yet it will still hold that long night in the print of its concrete, quiet as a held breath. Dorian drove away as shadows crossed the lane markers and the orange hood flashed twice in the side mirror. He felt lighter and heavier at the same time, which is how truth can sit after it finally finds a home. He did not chase the tune anymore, and he did not rush the checklist, because patient work had already taught him what mattered today. He believed there were other receipts under other lips somewhere, and he hoped other hands would take them gently. He kept his camera roll tidy, his gloves clean, and his pencil sharp enough to write down what needed remembering. The turnout stayed ordinary when he left, but the ordinary held a story now, and that felt exactly right. The stories. Why locals avoided that highway turnout after archived tapes. For years, people driving the old state highway between 2 small towns avoided a certain turnout near mile marker 91. The place looked harmless enough, a cracked patch of asphalt with a slanted guardrail, some weeds, and a broken streetlight. But those who grew up nearby said that if you stopped there at night, strange things happened. Back in 1996, a highway maintenance worker named Travis Keene was assigned to inspect storm drains along that stretch. He was 38, lived alone, and usually did his rounds before sunrise to avoid heavy traffic. That February morning, he radioed his supervisor around 4:20 a.m., saying he had stopped at the turnout near the ridge because a culvert there was flooded. It was the last transmission anyone heard from him. When the crew came later that day, they found his truck idling, driver's door open, and his flashlight lying in the ditch. His radio was still on the seat, buzzing with static. At first, they thought maybe he slipped and fell into the drainage pit, but search teams combed the area for 3 days with dogs and found nothing. The official report listed him as missing. In early spring that year, a state trooper found a small cassette recorder wedged under the passenger seat of Keene's truck. The tape was partially damaged by moisture, but audio engineers later salvaged parts of it. What they heard caused the highway department to quietly close that turnout for several months. Only fragments of the tape were ever released, though copies circulated among troopers and local reporters. On the tape, Keene's voice could be heard describing the flooded culvert and making notes for his report. He mentioned hearing a sound like running water even though the drainage was still. Then there was a pause, followed by the crunch of gravel and a faint metallic knocking, as if something were striking the guardrail. He muttered that someone must be out there. Moments later, his tone changed. He whispered that a figure was standing at the end of the turnout, near his truck lights, motionless. The rest of the tape dissolved into static, then a few seconds of muffled breathing, then silence. Investigators checked the surrounding land for any sign of trespassers. The nearest houses were half a mile away, and nobody reported hearing or seeing anything unusual that night. Still, the Highway Patrol logged several late-night calls over the next month from drivers who said they saw flashing lights or a person standing in the road waving them down near that same marker. When officers arrived, nothing was ever there. In 2002, a retired dispatcher named Loretta Vance told a local paper she had archived several of the old emergency tapes from that period. She said she remembered one specific call that never made it into the public file. According to her, a truck driver had radioed in saying there was a man in a reflective vest near the turnout signaling for help. By the time a patrol unit arrived 8 minutes later, the truck driver was gone. His rig was found 3 miles down the road, engine off, lights on, and the door locked from the inside. He was later located at a diner 20 miles away, confused and unable to recall leaving the cab. Reporters tried to verify her memory through the department's records office, but several of the call logs from 1996 through 1998 were missing, apparently lost during a server migration. Still, copies of the Keene tape surfaced online around 2011 after someone uploaded a restored version from an old police archive. Audio specialists claimed the frequency hiss on the track shifted in a way that suggested outdoor interference, like shortwave bleed or power line distortion, though no transmission lines ran near that turnout. A freelance investigator named Aaron Byers, who once worked for the State Transport Division, conducted his own study of the site in 2017. He took soil and water samples and found nothing unusual except traces of magnetized iron particles near the guardrail. He speculated that the metallic knocking Keene mentioned could have been the sound of loose signage vibrating from wind gusts. However, his field recorder picked up a faint, rhythmic pulse whenever his car engine was idling near the slope, a pattern that matched the timing of the static bursts on Keene's tape. Locals told Byers that animals often avoided that patch of asphalt. Drivers noticed deer crossing farther down the road and stray dogs turning away before the curb. One witness, a postal carrier named Darlene Ruiz, said she once stopped there to fix a loose mirror and saw what looked like a headlight beam flicker across the inside of her car, even though no vehicle was approaching. She left immediately and later noticed her clock had jumped ahead 12 minutes. Her phone's timestamp showed the same gap. The county eventually restructured the route in 2020, adding new lanes that bypassed the turnout completely. The old guardrail was removed, though pieces of it remained piled in a maintenance yard behind the highway office. Some claim that late at night, if you drive along the parallel service road, you can still see faint taillights hovering where the old pavement used to curve. Over time, the Keene disappearance became part of regional folklore, filed next to old mine accidents and bridge collapse rumors, yet certain details kept resurfacing, like the archived dispatcher notes that matched later reports, or the fact that multiple tapes contained the same background hum. A few amateur sleuths suggested it was a recording artifact caused by cheap equipment, but no one could explain why the distortion always rose in pitch before the moment of silence. In 2023, a hobbyist group using drone-mounted sensors mapped the ridge for a documentary. They detected an underground cavity roughly 12 feet beneath the turnout site, extending toward the nearby creek. Geological experts said it was probably an erosion tunnel formed by runoff, though it wasn't present in surveys from the 1980s. The cavity collapsed a few months later after heavy rain, leaving a sinkhole that swallowed part of the service fence. No trace of Travis Keene or his equipment was ever found in that area, But a later inventory from the transport department listed one missing flood gauge and a handheld magnetometer, both last signed out under his name. Today, older residents still tell travelers not to pull over between marker 90 and marker 92. They say sometimes when the air is heavy with moisture and the road hums beneath your tires, you can hear faint tapping, like metal brushing metal, and a low voice reporting water levels into an old cassette recorder. Whether that's just echo carried from the nearby drainage tunnels or something else entirely remains uncertain. What's clear is that no one in town stops at that turnout anymore. The stories might be exaggerated, but every legend begins somewhere, and this one began with a man who simply vanished while doing his job. One quiet morning in 1996, the stories. The quiet truth inside that coastal hospital wing. The hospital sat 2 blocks from the water, and the wing that faced the inlet stayed quiet through every busy shift. People joked about the sea air, then lowered their voices near that corridor like sound itself preferred to drift away there. On a mild spring morning, Leora Penn showed up with her coffee and a checklist, planning to finish safety checks before lunch. She was 34, and she worked as the environmental services supervisor, which meant she tracked odors, stains, leaks, and things nobody wanted to notice. She liked simple goals, like swapping cracked casters on linen bins before anyone tripped while rushing a patient. The storm last week flooded a basement stairwell, and today she wanted to log the final moisture readings and close the work order. Everything else could wait until the afternoon. Her plans changed before the first break. A nurse from the cardiac floor stopped her by the supply elevator and asked a question that landed with a small cold weight. "Did you move a bed out of 12 East overnight?" the nurse asked, because that room looked freshly mopped and nobody had the call light plugged in. Leora said no, then walked the nurse back to 12 East. The room held a made bed, smooth as a catalog photo, the kind of smooth that usually meant empty or staged. The call light cord curled like a quiet reminder, and the plug lay against clean tile. The monitor cart blinked in standby, which was normal if a discharge happened, which the board said had not. She pulled her phone and checked the overnight service log. The log showed a water alarm cleared at 3:12, plus a linen delivery at 3:28, and the standard generator test at 3:30. Nothing about a bed move. The floor techs had signed off at 4, which tracked with the rotation. She felt the wing hush in her ears as they stepped into the hall. The hush was not spooky, just oddly firm, like the sound of a theater after the speakers cut. She remembered 2 other techs mentioning the same hush months ago, which she had written down as acoustic weirdness from the renovation. The walls from the pre-1980 edition met the newer drywall at shallow angles, which could bend sound enough to make a whisper vanish. The nurse pointed down the corridor toward rooms 14 through 20, which were half full after the storm transfers. "You ever notice the alarms sound softer here?" she said, "even with doors open." That question turned a small worry into a task. Leora thanked her, then called Rafi Soto from facilities, who was 41 and worked nights on chillers and pressure monitors. Rafi said he could meet her after he ran a test on the pharmacy air handlers. She told him 12 East first, and to bring his handheld sound meter. While she waited, she checked the housekeeping closet and found a single wet mop hung wrong side up, which bothered her more than it should. The rag bucket held 5 clean tags, which meant 1 tag missing. She counted cart liners, then photographed the tag numbers, then texted her team group, which answered with the usual thumbs and jokes. Rafi walked in with his meter and a grin, then lost the grin when he heard the haul. He held up the meter while a monitor alarm chirped in room 16. The reading was lower than upstairs by real points, not just a little. He tried the code blue test switch on the mock panel, and the hallway speaker tone sounded like a phone in another apartment. They stood there for a quiet minute that stretched. She felt the cool push of air on her ankles, like a vent trying too hard. Rafi crouched and checked the gap under door 18, then looked at a ceiling return. "This wing was set for negative pressure during a flu surge," he said, "and someone forgot to return the dampers. That could pull sound into the duct runs." They both knew sound should not disappear completely, and hospital speakers had their own lines, but the observation mattered. Leora asked if maintenance logs showed damper positions. Raffi said the old building used manual marks with paint dashes after a storm, and sometimes those faded. He called his lead, who checked archived notes from winter. The notes reportedly listed a temporary negative pressure setting for isolation overflow and a reminder to reset after discharge. The reminder had no follow-up check line, which could be simple human miss and not a cover for anything worse. Still, the room felt staged wrong. Leora walked back to 12 East, then took photos of the made bed from 3 angles, partly habit, partly evidence. She opened the closet and found a folded patient gown without a size sticker, which was nothing by itself. She checked the Sharps container seal, then stepped into the bathroom and looked at the floor drain for silt patterns. The ring looked clean in a way that suggested a recent rinse, not a final deep clean. She called central coverage and asked if a float nurse had swapped rooms overnight. The charge nurse checked dispatch logs for bed control and found a 1-minute call at 3:29 that dropped before anyone spoke, which felt like a butt dial or a cold finger hitting end. The caller ID showed the station handset in this wing. Leora went to the security office and asked for hallway footage. The officer on duty, a patient man named Colm Reyes, 37, pulled the clip from 3:15 to 4. They watched the split screens without commentary. At 3:17, a linen cart rolled in from the elevator without a staff badge visible. The cart moved slowly, with one wheel catching, which matched the caster she meant to swap today. At 3:19, the cart paused outside 12 East, then shifted, then kept moving toward the end of the hall. They watched for the badge reader hits that should flank every elevator entry on that floor. The system registered 1 badge at 3:14 from Raffi earlier, and 1 at 4 from a night nurse, and none for the cart. Colm explained that carts come up with drivers who badge at the service basement, then sometimes ride with a different staffer when floors swap loads. That could account for the missing badge, and also could not. They checked the service elevator camera and caught the same cart doors sliding open at 3:16. The elevator captured a slice of reflective plastic and the edge of a sleeve, no clear face, and the time overlay blinked because of the generator test. The overlay sync had drifted last week, which Colm was already fixing, which meant timestamps needed cross-checks against other clocks. Leora asked for a still from the moment the cart paused at 12 East. Colm printed a page with the grainy frame that showed the cart handle and a sliver of the room placard. She carried the print back to the wing and held it near the door under the light. The sliver matched the height of the placard, which confirmed little, but the angle of the cart showed the handle turned inward, which delivery staff rarely did when rolling past. She took out her moisture reader and checked the wall behind the bed. The numbers showed dry, which fit the recent mopping. She checked the strip beneath the bed casters and saw a thin gray smear that did not look like dust. She swabbed it with a clean wipe and noted a faint powdery drag on the cloth, not slippery like floor finish. She sent the wipe to Central Supply with a note asking for a basic powder test, which was really a habit from her last job at a larger facility. In that job, she once traced a peculiar residue back to construction dust tracked from a blocked stairwell, which explained an odd cough cluster that week. She had learned that small housekeeping notes sometimes solved problems everyone else framed as strange luck. By late morning, she had a sketch of the corridor on her clipboard with marks for return vents and speaker positions. Raffi walked the ceiling path and found a junction where 2 return lines met above room 15, which could create a pressure sink if one line pulled harder. He said he would check the damper blades for manual marks, then pulled down a tile and sighed at a rusted screw. "This wing is like a ship that forgot how to float," he said, which she appreciated. A nurse from 19, an older man named Keaton Ward, 49, stopped by and mentioned something from winter. He said he heard a voice on the hall speaker one night that sounded like a whisper on a phone. Just one word that might have been wait. He filed the report with his supervisor and chalked it up to a bleed from the intercom test. He offered to show his written statement, which he kept in a folder because he kept everything. His statement matched the time when isolation overflow ended, which lined up with the damper story. Leora worked through lunch and built a timeline with the clearest markers. The service log showed an alarm at 3:12 and a linen event at 3:28. The call log showed a 1-minute station call at 3:29. The camera showed a cart at 319 by the hall feed with a possible overlay drift. The badge system had no hit at the elevator at 316, likely because of a basement badge only. None of that explained the made bed and the unplugged call light. She checked the oxygen cylinder rack in the utility room and counted 2 empties in the wrong slots. The exchange sheets said 4 full arrived yesterday afternoon, with 2 used overnight in rooms 17 and 20. That math should yield 2 full and instead showed 1, which could be a miscount or something more routine, like a cylinder staged for respiratory and not logged. She asked respiratory, who checked their sheet and said they had pulled 1 extra for a transfer that ended up canceled, and that the cylinder sat by a stairwell for 10 minutes while a therapist helped a patient. The therapist sent a note with the time, which was 3:25, which touched the period where things felt odd. By mid-afternoon, Central Supply texted back a photo of the wipe, with a small note. The powder fluoresced under a standard light test in a way that fit with foot powder or a powdered latex glove residue, not construction dust. That pointed back toward a human routine, not a leak from upstairs. The note did not accuse a person, and it did not need to. She went back to 12 East and sat in a guest chair and listened. She heard the sea through glass and vents, a soft hush without rhythm. She leaned forward and spoke into the empty room, a simple line that felt like testing a bridge. If anyone adjusted your alarms to keep the peace, I will put them back where they belong. Rafi returned with a small rag of paint, marked with faded red dashes. He had found the damper blades set to a position used during winter isolation, which explained part of the quiet. He reset the blades to neutral, then ran the test tone again. The hallway speaker sounded like a real alarm finally, and 2 nurses popped their heads out with startled faces, which reassured her and annoyed them. They still had to explain the made bed and the unplugged cord. She checked the discharge board again and found no new names, just a morning transfer to imaging. She pulled archived calls and found another brief call at 3:31 from the same station that ended without audio, which now looked like someone purging a stuck line. Column radioed that he found a maintenance note from Winter that instructed staff to purge stale intercom channels after negative pressure resets, which nobody had repeated since. They called the linen contractor and asked about the overnight driver swap pattern. The contractor said his drivers usually wheel carts onto the elevator and ride to the target floor, but during generator tests, they sometimes stop 1 floor early and let a staffer guide the cart to avoid stopping between floors. He checked his dispatch sheet and found a driver note that said elevator stopped short during test, staff pushed to 12, all good. He could not give a name, only the time block. By late afternoon, the picture sharpened enough to make sense without drama. A generator test overlapped with a linen delivery and a damper setting that muffled alarms. A staffer moved a delivery cart, paused by 12 East, noticed the mop bucket, pushed the cart aside, and quickly mopped a spill. The staffer made the bed to help, then forgot the call light plug during the rush. The unplugged cord did not match best practice, which would be fixed with a reminder, not a report that accused anyone. The part that still bothered her had to do with the oxygen cylinder timing and the extra pause by the stairwell. She asked Colm to pull stairwell footage if available, which he did, and showed a therapist propping the door while holding a cylinder with one arm and shepherding a patient with the other. The patient looked steady, which matched a canceled transport returning to bed. The moment accounted for the missing cylinder, which returned to the rack at 3:43. She closed her notebook and wrote an incident review in plain language. The review recommended returning dampers to neutral after surge events, verifying hallway speaker levels during generator tests, and making a fast rule about plugging call cords before remaking any bed. She added a line about how lavender air freshener should stay out of patient rooms because it could mask odors that indicate a problem. She always added that line, and sometimes it stuck. Before she left the wing, the nurse from earlier walked up with a small, tired smile. "So, not a haunting," she said. "Just a lot of people doing 3 jobs at once." Leora nodded and answered with the calm confidence of someone who had stared at too many messes that looked like mysteries. "It is pretty much always the simple chain," she said, "and sometimes the chain gets quiet enough that nobody notices the missing link." That evening, after the emails went out, she stood by the loading dock and watched the inlet. The tide came in without hurrying, and the gulls wrote slow lines across the air that nobody would ever read. The wing would sound normal tomorrow, which meant patients would hear every beep that mattered, and staff would hear every page that counted. The quiet truth had not been a ghost, or a cover, or a headline. It had been dampers, timing, human judgment, and a hallway that swallowed sound for a while. She locked the dock door and tucked her clipboard into her bag. She would never tell the story with flair, because the unsung fixes never loved applause. She would remember the hush, though, and the way it taught her to trust the boring explanations first, then test them anyway. In a building stacked with lives and wires, truth rarely shouted. It arrived like a tide in a coastal wing, steady and patient, and loud enough once you fixed the vents. The stories. This abandoned cabin is a warning trap in winter. The old cabin beside the county line looks empty from the road during storms. Yet a warm porch light appears. Drivers aim for it when whiteout wipes the world, because a light means shelter, or at least a neighbor. Rhea Calder is 36 and works as a county snow operations supervisor, and she keeps a spiral notebook of storm anomalies. She shows up before dawn, checks blades and salt loads, and marks complaint calls with a thin blue pen. Her goal this morning is simple: get the ridge plowed before the school runs, then swing by a trouble spot. The spot is a bend near an abandoned mining cabin, where people keep calling for help when the sky goes white. The incident that changes her plan starts with two archived calls that ping the same mile marker and both mention the same porch light. The first caller said the light flicked on like someone waved them in, and then their SUV sank past the axle in drifted powder. The second caller said he saw reflective stakes like a private driveway, and he trusted the stakes and followed them in. Rhea drives out with a plow and a county ranger, and the wind pulls spindrift across the hood like milk. She idles beside the bend, then walks the last stretch on a packed lane that should not exist. The lane is narrow, precisely the width of a small plow, and the snow on its edges shows a scalloped bite that her crews do not leave. She studies the porch light, which is wired to a salvaged marine battery and a hockey puck-sized solar panel. The cabin window is boarded, yet bare footprints cross the porch, and the snow on the mat is tamped smooth with a boot heel. A battery radio inside clicks on and off on weather band, then goes silent like a timer has died. A tow truck appears before Rhea can call the last caller back, and the driver waves from a bright red cab. He introduces himself as Tully Grange, and he says he just happened to be nearby, which is unlikely on a weekday morning before the bus runs. He backs toward the trapped SUV with a practiced arc, then stops when Rhea holds up a hand. "This is county equipment," she says. And he shrugs, then says he can wait in the pullout. She notes the pullout was not there last week, because she passed here in a smaller storm and saw only brush and drift. The fresh gravel under his tires is a tan quartz blend not used by their supplier, which her crews call peach pit gravel because it stains gloves. Complication lands in small details that refuse to match, and details are the only honest witnesses in bad weather. The reflective stakes near the porch are county colors, yet the plastic sleeves are slightly glossy, which means hardware store knockoffs. The stake spacing mirrors a county driveway template, yet the end flare is reversed, which a training manual would not allow. She opens her spiral and writes the count of stakes and the order of colors, then photographs each with her phone. The ranger sets a trail camera on a fence post, angled at the bend, and another on the porch beam, both tagged with the hour and coordinates. Rhea pulls a corner of the mat and finds two zip ties and a clipped wire, both wet from this morning, not last week. Investigation moves step by step when the storm pauses and the phones ring less, so she visits a gas station near the turnoff. The clerk says a red tow truck fills up on calm days and buys coffee for anyone who mentions the cabin. A retired school bus driver named Lauren Ibarra stops for a paper, and he says he saw private plow tracks peel off before the storm, then vanish in wind. She requests dispatch logs for the past 3 winters and filters for that mile marker, then highlights clusters that pair with heavy snow. Callers mention the same porch light, the same reflective stakes, and the same quick tow arrival, which dispatch marks as helpful. She watches a dash cam clip from last month where the light clicks on as the hood swings left, then the video ends with a soft crunch. Archived calls from 2021 mention a ham radio voice that says shelter is nearby, and then silence like a squelch cut. A volunteer firefighter says in a witness statement that the cabin used to be a safety cache and now nobody claims ownership. A Forest Service mail thread she prints at the office says the cabin fell off the map after a boundary change in 2019. Rhea returns with 2 crew trucks and a trooper who knows every rancher along that ridge, and they wait for nightfall. A thin moon slides behind blown cloud, and the porch light pops alive at the first gust, soft and steady like a welcome sign. A compact pickup rolls up from the far side with its lights off, then a figure hops out and crouches at the porch corner. The ranger whispers that the figure holds a small remote, and the light changes from dim to bright after a thumb tap. Rhea steps forward and says, "Good evening," and the figure bolts toward the pickup, then slips where the packed lane meets churned gravel. The trooper covers the exit with his lights, and the pickup idles in a pool of steam, and the figure surrenders with hands up. They identify him as a subcontractor to Grange Recovery, and his jacket pockets hold a keychain remote and 2 spare batteries. Zip ties match the ones under the mat, and a roll of reflective tape matches the stakes, which are cut to driveway template lengths. He says he was only maintaining a safety light and keeping the lane open, which is not a service the county requested. Rhea stays methodical, because motive hides under habit, not speeches that arrive too fast. She asks where the gravel came from, and he says a supplier in the valley, yet the receipts in his glove box show a hardware warehouse 2 counties south. She asks why the radio trips a loop on weatherband after the door opens, and he says it helps people feel calm. She compiles a timeline that starts with a bridge closure 3 winters ago, which pushed navigation apps toward this county road. Drivers used the cabin light as a wayfinder during whiteouts, while their maps insisted the bend belonged to a safe connector. The subcontractor and a partner groomed a false lane with a small plow, then dragged a lure line past the porch to a drift. Vehicles followed the stakes and the shine, then sank where the wind always filled the cut, and then a tow contract appeared fast. The subcontractor had a scanner tuned for dispatch, and he shadowed snow squalls, then nudged the light when a hood turned. The porch light served as both promise and bait, a warning tone that pretended to help while herding people toward trouble. The twist clicks when Rhea notices something everyone else ignored, because details are stubborn and patient when money moves. The stakes used county colors, yet the white stripe appears cream at dusk, which happens when old tape yellows in cold. The county only switched to that tape after a backorder last spring, yet the stakes showed last winter, which means someone copied and refreshed. She pulls a photo from the first cluster of calls and zooms on a stake that leans at a slant near a spruce. A boot print sits at the base with a split heel pattern, and the subcontractor wears the same make, which the trooper confirms. The peach pit gravel under the pullout matches bags stacked in the pickup bed, stamped with a store brand not used locally. They bring in Tully Grange on a quiet afternoon, and he arrives calm, carrying a thermos with a sticker from a drag racing track. He says he never told anyone to follow that light, and he is right in the narrow way salesmen are right. He made sure the light stayed visible from the highway, and he made sure the false lane looked exactly like a private driveway. Rhea uses her spiral notes and dispatch timestamps and the dashcam clip to assemble a proof that a prosecutor can lift. The proof is plain. The lane grooming aligns with tow arrivals, and the light remote explains the synchronized porch glow. The radio loop satisfies a claim of safety service, yet the loop trips only when a door opens after a driver commits. Witnesses give short statements. A school custodian says he saw stakes in a truck behind the parts store, and a rancher remembers a trailer loaded with gravel. A hardware buyer confirms past orders of reflective sleeves and tape in county patterns, then prints invoices with dates that match storm weeks. The trail camera video shows the subcontractor stepping off distances with a tape measure, then pressing reflectors into drifted banks. The county files charges on false markings and a long list of fraud-related counts, and the state adds a charge tied to interference. Rhea builds a corrective plan with simple steps: remove the stakes, angle the porch light away from the bend, and post clear closure boards. She requests new advance signs that warn of no outlet during storms, and the road team builds a berm past the bend. In spring, she visits the cabin in daylight when the stream runs high and the spruce throws a clean shadow. The boards are still up, and the marine battery sits in a crate with a tag that says evidence in blocky marker. She writes a last page in the spiral: cabin neutralized, tow arrivals normal, and local drivers back to watching the sky instead of a lure. She keeps the dashcam clip on her work desktop as a reminder of how easily stressed people choose the first light they see. She writes a line on a training slide: never chase glow in a whiteout, choose distance markers and windbreaks and patience. She speaks at a town meeting using plain words, then thanks the bus drivers and the ranch hands who notice small things that save bigger things. According to a statement filed later, the subcontractor said he borrowed the idea from a forum where recovery outfits shared winter tips. The forum is archived now, and the thread title mentions hazard magnets, which makes her jaw tighten in a quiet office. She forwards the archive to a state liaison, then shuts her laptop and listens to the heater tick inside the shop. 2 winters later, a driver who once followed the light sends the department a short letter with a photo of the bend in Sunday. The letter says, "Thank you for fixing the trap, and thank you for posting signs that speak like a human, not a brochure." Rhea pins the photo on the bulletin board and draws a small check beside the mile marker on a laminated map. The cabin still stands, where the wind stacks powder against the wall, and a jay hops along the porch rail after a thaw. People talk about that porch like a lucky star in a bad stretch. Yet the real luck was a person with a notebook. A false beacon is a cruel thing in winter, and the fix was not a heroic beatdown, only careful eyes and a stop. She drives past when each first snow begins, then checks the berm and the markers and the culvert past the spruce. The road hums under studded tires, and the bend looks like any other bend in a county full of the same bends. She knows a trap can wear a smile and a soft bulb, and a warning means nothing unless it points away from harm. The old cabin still looks empty if you do not look close, and light can lie when money needs help. Rhea prefers the dull honesty of a reflector that never blinks, and a berm that refuses to pretend it is a road. She closes her spiral at the end of each shift and treats winter like a puzzle that pays back the patient mind. The abandoned cabin at Lake Minchumina. A quiet airstrip, a frozen lake, and an unclaimed cabin drew 3 people into a chain of disputed facts. Dana Holt was 41, a wildlife biologist from Fairbanks, sent to map willow stands around Lake Minchumina for browse surveys. She carried a handheld GPS unit, a laminated grid map, and a notebook stamped with state records inventory marks. Her assignment reportedly tied to a late winter moose project funded by a regional habitat grant from Anchorage. Dispatch logs later noted her gear list, including a borrowed sat phone with a weak interior signal. The plan put her 2 nights lakeside, with a 3rd day for interviews in the village. Trevor Pike was 58, a bush pilot out of Nenana, flying a well-kept Cessna on skis toward the long white lake. He hauled fuel barrels, food boxes, and the biologist's duffel inside a strapped canvas pod for weight balance. Archived notes from his mechanic mentioned fresh spark plugs, a carb heat check, and a recent cylinder compression test. He told friends he liked the run across low spruce because the flatlight taught careful judgment. Some locals claimed he kept a copy of county file from 2009 in the hangar, though investigators never confirmed that. Mara Kovic was 33, a seasonal ranger based near Denali Park headquarters, riding snow machine for a cabin stewardship check. She logged cabin conditions, counted split firewood, and photographed stoves for safety compliance with a borrowed office camera. Her unit followed a written route that skirted the lake edge and crossed a marked portage used by winter travelers. The cabin at the lake's western reach appeared on her sheet as unused, though records conflict on the maintenance code. She planned to verify the lock, then continue north toward an old trapline shed. The cabin itself sat low in thin spruce, its roof scabbed with scrap metal and patched plywood from earlier seasons. A dock beam lay buried in snow with iron spikes that showed orange despite fresh powder and wind crust. Windows were covered with sheet tin, while one pane held a sagging plastic film stapled into frozen trim. A stovepipe rose, bent and scarred, suggesting a fall or awkward repair that never fully seated. Nearest tracks curved from the lake glare to the trees, then vanished into a wind-stripped swale. Pike landed before noon, set his skis near the hard line of the windrow, and watched crystals skate across the surface. He idled past a pair of snow berms and shut down with the prop horizontal, then stepped onto the snow with a practiced swing. The air sat dry and flat, and the tree line worked like a low fence against the distant hills. He saw the cabin shape through willow and alder stems, and he waved toward a dark doorway he assumed stood open. According to dispatch logs, his final radio call reported safe arrival and stable conditions. Holt skied from the drop point toward willow clusters flagged on her grid, pausing to measure stem height and browse scars. She wrote times that matched the sun's slow wheel across pale cloud, and she made notes on minor moose trails crossing drifts. Snow settled around her knees where the crust failed, and a dry squeak sounded where sleet grains spilled under her poles. Her GPS line wavered along the bank, then cut inland to avoid pressure ridges near the lake's midsection. State records later matched her coordinates to a low bench of black spruce and open willow. Kovic reached the lake's western edge near afternoon, where the wind pressed a clean glaze across the old trail. She idled her machine and lifted goggles, then checked the map case that held laminated sheets with numbered cabin codes. Her photographs showed a dark rectangle among cramped trunks, the near wall patched with mismatched planks and weathered screws. She logged time, temperature estimation, and the presence of one snow-packed step leading to the door seam. Investigators never confirmed whether her GPS waypoint uploaded immediately due to weak signal near the trees. The door stood closed, but a thin line of snow had drifted against the threshold, which suggested no recent exit. Kovic brushed the seam and pressed the handle, then paused when the wood shifted and a smell of old ash slipped out. Inside, light fell through a tear in the plastic, showing a rough table and a stove flecked with rust. A nail-can sat on the floor, half full of screws, and a spool of braided line rested beside a chipped mug. She wrote that nothing looked stolen, though records conflict about the status of a missing tool roll. Pike dragged fuel drums from the sled and stowed them near an alder line, and he marked each top with grease pencil. He strapped one box with canned beans and pilot bread onto a child's toboggan he kept for makeshift hauling. His boot tracks crossed an older trail that drift had softened, and the prints filled slowly as gusts pushed through the scrub. He followed the trail to the cabin edge, then lifted a glove against the window gap to block the glare. According to archived notes, he later mentioned a shape like jackets piled low along the far wall. Holt circled back toward the lake for new bearings, then saw a narrow flag of smoke pull sideways above the tree line. She clipped her notebook shut and worked back along her inbound track, and the smoke thinned as she crossed a hollow. A faint hammer sound carried through the cold, 1 and 2. Then a pause, then one again in careful pace. She told a recorder later that wind tricked distance and the sound came from ahead at the willow fringe. Dispatch logs list a call from her sat phone that broke before a location could transmit. Kovic noted the stove held cooled ash shaped like close-grained fans, which sometimes form after slow overnight burns. She saw 2 bed frames without mattresses and a plastic tub of nails beside a broken lantern with a missing globe. A shoestring tied around a shelf post held a cluster of labels with faded writing and a smeared date in blue. She wrote it as midwinter, though investigators never confirmed the writing due to moisture damage that lifted the ink. Her photos show a floor scuff that turns at the threshold and stops under the hinge shadow. Pike knocked and stepped to the doorway, then waited while his eyes adjusted to the low light and muted colors. The ranger nodded and pointed at the scuffed floor, and he answered with an open palm toward the stove and table. He set the food box on the bench and tugged a corner of the plastic on the window to let air pass. The plastic snapped at one brittle crease, and a thin clatter rolled across the boards until it settled near the foot. Archived notes remark that the sound resembled pellets falling through a funnel, which matched small screws. Holt arrived as clouds thickened, set her poles by the door, and counted 3 sets of prints arranged in a loose chevron. She wrote that one trail ran from the lake to the door and another crossed from south to west without clear origin. The third ran out toward the mid-lake glare, and its heel marks looked deep where crust had softened. She photographed a partial tread rib that looked commercial rather than custom, and the pattern resembled a hardware chain winter boot. State records later attached her images to a case file with conflicting captions and differing scale bars. The stove mouth held a curl of birch, which burned at the end like a lifted spoon and then fell. A few flakes of ash moved up the pipe seam, and a faint warmth hung 2 feet above the floorboards. Kovic said the cabin smelled like old smoke, not fresh, and she thought someone burned earlier and left. Pike disagreed and pointed to a brown ring on the stove lid where a pot's wet outline dried in an uneven halo. Investigators never confirmed any pot, and the photographs lack a matching circle on the table boards. They found a ledger book under the bench, wrapped in waxed paper that crinkled and tore when lifted free of splinters. The cover showed a stamped supply brand for flour, and inside a rough list of dates traced a column along the margin. County File from 2009 reportedly mentioned a similar cabin ledger used for shared caches among winter travelers. The dates here stepped through early winter into late January, then stopped abruptly without a name or a final note. Records conflict on whether a missing page existed, because the thread holes do not appear consistent. Outside, the lake made a hollow drumming as wind shoved crust into ridges that ticked against the skis and sled. Holt tested the crust and stepped toward the mid-lake track, which bent left and right like a cautious crossing. A shallow oval showed where someone placed a heavy bag and lifted it again, leaving granules pressed into the glaze. She measured the oval's length with her ski pole and wrote the number inside her notebook above a time mark. Dispatch logs later repeat that number with an error, which investigators never resolved after interviews ended. Pike followed the south trail along the tree line where low branches swept the snow and hid thin lines of travel. He saw a thumb-sized shard of clear plastic with a rolled edge, which looked like a lantern piece with frost glaze. He placed it on a stump and marked a small circle around it with the ski tip, then turned toward the cabin again. The light dropped and the sky fell into flat shadow, which pushed contrast down until the trees felt closer. Archived notes suggest the shard later disappeared, and no inventory photo shows its presence. Kovic radioed a quick status to a regional repeater, reporting cabin access, no apparent vandalism, and uncertain recent activity. Wind noise clipped her words, and the signal dragged, then returned in a burst that carried only the timestamp. She closed the stove lid and reset the ledger on the bench, then photographed the plastic tear near the window frame. The cold sharpened, and her machine coughed when she thumbed the primer, which she wrote as normal for that temperature. Investigators never confirmed the exact temperature, as the village reading differed from the lake's surface reading that evening. They agreed to leave the cabin secured and marked the location as potentially occupied within the last day, pending new snow. Holt wanted one more sweep near the mid-lake oval, and Pike offered to walk the edge while Kovic logged coordinates. Footfalls made short squeaks and a low creek where drift hid shallow overflow, and each step left a clean trench. They stopped at a second oval imprint that bore the same pole-measured length as the first near the glare. State records later argued the ovals could be gear rests from an auger or a short fuel can. Dark came quickly, and the trees lost edges, so they moved toward the airstrip where the plane sat, angled into the wind. Pike primed and pulled the prop through slowly, then climbed in and checked a panel glow that looked steady. The engine caught with a short puff and settled into an even sound that smoothed with carb heat after a careful count. Holt strapped into the right seat, and Kovic rode her machine along the edge until the light fell to gray. Archived notes describe no further radio calls from the lake until morning. Overnight, light snow reached the village and the lake, and morning tracks softened into shallow rolls by midday. A second ranger team reached the cabin from the north and found the door secured and the stove cold. They reported no ledger on the bench, and the nails sat in the can without the top layer that Kovic described. Some locals claimed wind pushed small things under gaps, and mice could drag paper toward cracks near the sill. Investigators never confirmed any mouse sign, and the photographs show only smooth dust along the baseboard. Holt filed her browse data in Fairbanks within the week, and the coordinates aligned with earlier moose counts from a prior winter. She included a short addendum about the ovals and the partial tread pattern that matched a commercial winter boot. State records acknowledged her note and attached it to a maintenance ticket for the cabin with a follow-up box. The ticket moved between offices, and records conflict about whether a later inspection occurred before thaw along the lake. A final entry closed the ticket in early spring with a single line about no hazard identified. Pike flew 2 more runs to the interior that month, and his logbook shows fuel consumption within normal range for the airframes. He wrote short comments about surface conditions near Minchumina, including 2 mentions of glare patches that made depth judgment difficult. Archived notes add that he left a spare belt and plug set with a friend at the Nenana hangar. Some locals claimed he removed the county file from 2009 from the shelf, though investigators never confirmed the timing. His last statement about the cabin said only that empty places keep their own time, which is not an opinion recorded as fact. Kovic finished her cabin route and submitted photographs, and her supervisor added captions and a brief summary for the binder. The caption under the plastic tear mentioned a likely weather-related failure of the film from prior patchwork. Dispatch logs show a short call from her to a friend near McGrath about icy trails and a slow return after a storm. She kept the route map with the laminated codes, and a later scan shows a faint pencil check beside the cabin square. Investigators never confirmed who made the check, and the binder copy prints the line with a light streak. Weeks later, village travelers reported 2 small stakes visible near the mid-lake line after a warm spell cut the crust. The stakes sat where the ovals had rested, and each held braided line tied in a simple hitch around the shaft. A small flag of cloth clung to one stake and tore free when pulled, leaving a short fringe of thread. Some locals claimed the cloth looked like shirt flannel, while others said it was a cut rag from a fuel wipe. Records conflict on color, and no sample appears in the final envelope attached to the case file. By summer, lake water pulled at the dock beam and lifted it slightly, showing spikes that caught sun beside floating moss. The cabin door swelled in the damp, and the plastic patch sagged where heat softened the staples along the frame. A new scratch marked the bench top, straight and pale, with fine dust settled at the far end near the ledger place. No ledger lay there, and the nails in the can showed a different arrangement than winter photographs from the binder. State records closed the seasonal report with a line that stated no further action pending future complaints. Autumn brought clear nights and sharp stars over the interior, and the lake edge hushed with thin ice before snowfall. The cabin sat in the same low posture among thin spruce, its stovepipe tilted and bent in familiar profile. Travelers passed on the portage and saw no light inside, and the door held fast against early wind. The ovals by the mid-lake line had filled and hardened, and the stakes fell flat under glare and frost. Dispatch logs for the region listed minor incidents only, and no entry referenced the cabin after the first snow. What remains are records that do not align, voices that differ on colors and smells, and photographs that miss small things. The cabin holds patched boards and a bent pipe, with a bench scar that means little without a missing book. Some locals claimed the place hosted caches that shifted among hands, but investigators never confirmed any schedule or written rules. There is a stove lid ring that might be a shadow, and footprints that waver between soft crust and uncertain depth. According to state records and archived notes, the cabin stands unclaimed at Lake Minchumina, and the file stays thin.